Test 1, 2. All right, the mic's on. Guys, we're on air. It's good to see you. Everybody come on in and grab a seat. You guys think you're going to be out of eyesight over here, but I can move to the back and I can turn. So, you can run, but you can't hide. It's good to see everybody. We're in Luke chapter 19 tonight. And we're going to make it to Jerusalem finally. Okay, we've been going about almost 10 chapters of the journey. And we ended last week with Jesus telling kind of a tough story and about how folks who think that they're going to be part of the kingdom, they're going to be disappointed. They're going to be surprised because they've really missed what it's about. And in fact, draws a comparison perhaps to a historical event that happened and ends the story talking about the folks that wouldn't accept the king taken out and they were killed. And so at the end of that, it says, after Jesus had said this in verse 28, he went on ahead going up to Jerusalem. And as he approached Bethphage and Bethany at the hill called Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples, saying to them, go to the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you'll find a colt tied there which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, why are you untying it? Tell him the Lord needs it. And those who were sent ahead went and found it just as he told them. As they were untying the colt, its owners asked, why are you untying it? They replied, the Lord needs it. They brought it to Jesus, threw their cloaks on the coat, and put Jesus on it. Okay, your homework for this week was to think about, and we're not going to get to it for just a few minutes, but to think about it's called the triumphant entry into Jerusalem. It's an event that's in all four of the Gospels. It's a pretty significant event. And I asked you to think about, why did Jesus choose to enter Jerusalem this way? And of course, the Sunday school answer is to fulfill prophecy. And that's true, and that's right. But I'd like to think beyond it a little bit about, why? Here's Jesus throughout his ministry pulling people aside and telling them, don't tell anybody that I did this. Okay, going out of his way to not draw attention to himself. And now he's going to come into Jerusalem in as visible a way as you could possibly imagine. So we'll talk about that in a minute. First, we got this sort of, how did Jesus know this colt was going to be ready? Is this a miracle? What do you think? Could be. Okay, Tyler.
Well, now, don't quote me on this, but it might be a bit of that God in the flesh thing.
Okay, all right. Tyler says, okay, no. Yeah, obviously, here's a guy who knows men's parts, embarrasses Pharisees and teachers of the law by pointing out, I know what you're thinking, you're thinking this. So it could be as simple as, this is, God in the flesh. The other thing is, possibility is, he's coming in from Jericho. You got Bethphage and Bethany. There are folks he knows in Bethany, okay, Mary, Martha, Lazarus. Making arrangements to do this. He could have made arrangements and just didn't need to tell us, okay? At any rate, I'm going into Jerusalem. Go get a colt. Go get a colt or a donkey, okay? We're not talking about a horse here. We're talking about a donkey. And go get it. If anybody asks you, you just tell them the Lord needs it, okay? So they go do that. So Jesus comes into Jerusalem. And in fact, let's read those verses. Verse 35, they brought it to Jesus, threw their cloaks on the colt, and put Jesus on it. As he went along, people spread their cloaks on the road. When he came near the place where the road goes down to the Mount of Olives, or goes down the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully to praise God in loud voices for all the miracles they had seen. Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest. Let's stop right there. How does your videotape play? How do you see this happening? What sort of images come into your mind? You think about Jesus sitting on this donkey and the crowds. Mike.
I mean, it's hard not to have that picture we've all seen since we were kids, no matter whose version of the Bible it is. It's got that almost the same picture. But I mean, I guess I picture it's, to me though, I'm thinking of, because what we just said earlier of him always telling them not to tell people, you know, all this kind of stuff, that they're crying out these praises, and Jesus isn't saying,
he's not.
Keep it down. So it's like, we can actually do it, you know, you know, and it just kind of, the word spreads like that. He's not going to stop us from doing it. He's, you know, so they know something's big. It's exciting. They don't quite grasp it all, but he's coming to Jerusalem. This is not a, I think that's a pretty, if you're believing in the Messiah, that's a, you know about that prophecy, you know, at least that part of it, Jerusalem.
Well, not only is he coming to Jerusalem, he's coming when? Just for the Passover. Passover is about a week away. Okay, and so people are already coming into town. We've talked before that there are estimates that during Jesus' day, there were some Passovers where Jerusalem swelled from 50,000 to almost 1 million people. Wow. Okay. So we're talking the potential here for lots of people who have been traveling with, some of them who've been traveling with Jesus, the word's spreading, and so there is this palpable excitement that's going on. Chris? Oh, okay. Karen, and then Chris.
I'm trying to remember, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. But I remembered he wanted to come in, and he is coming in as a king would have come in. Okay. However, if he had come in on a horse, I think that is coming back into the city as a victor or some kind of, you know, from war or something like that.
Okay. We will come back to that point in just a minute. But it's significant. Yeah, Chris?
Well, I was kind of wanting to go back to the part about the humble and mounted on a donkey.
Okay.
Because Zechariah 9, I was trying to find it. Zechariah 9:9 says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion, shout in triumph, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is just and endowed with salvation, humble and mounted on a donkey."
Okay.
So when you ask the question, was this a miracle that Jesus knew this donkey was going to be ready? I would say it had been written 450 years before that it was going to happen. And so in some ways, yeah, it's a miracle because God made it all work out that way. But it was planned from 400 years before that this was going to happen. And he was going to make a point by coming in with salvation, but he was going to be humble and mounted on a donkey as opposed to an earthly king, which usually comes in with horses and chariots and pomp and glory.
Okay. Well, again, we will come back to that point in just a minute. But certainly the prophecy in Zechariah is pretty specific about what's going on. And Jesus is fulfilling a prophecy here that both folks who were in support of him or folks who were antagonistic to him knew. Okay, and so I think there had to have been some connections being made there. Tim?
You asked how the movie in my head would run.
Yeah.
And like Mike said, we're all familiar with the scene that we've always been painted and envisioned of everybody, Hosanna in the highest, everybody's excited. But my interest would be how Jesus, zoom in on Jesus's person as he's entering the city, the same city that he's cried over.
Okay.
Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. knowing what's coming. He's the only one that does. It would have been very interesting to know his feelings and what he looked like as he entered, humbly for sure.
Okay.
But it
We
would
know
have been
that
an
he's
interesting
going to
scene.
cry over Jerusalem. Okay, and in fact, Luke's account has him doing as part of that procession in. So this is not Jesus coming into town like the Queen, doing this sort of thing. There's a lot of emotion that is going on. Renee.
And that emotion would be played out in Gethsemane.
Okay.
He knew that there would be a physical death for him,
Okay.
and it would be a painful one.
Okay. Well, as he's coming in over the Mount of Olives and down the Mount of Olives, the whole city is laid out in front of him. And it's the same journey he's going to make under arrest in just a few days' time. Okay, so certainly there's lots of emotion there. Where do you see Jesus in the crowd? Is he at the head of the crowd? The middle of the crowd? Or is he at the end of the crowd? Where do you think he is? Where's Santa Claus in a parade? He's at the end. Okay? When Tampa won the first Super Bowl and they had the parade downtown, where are you supposed the trophy was? It wasn't at the head. It wasn't at the head. It was at the end. I think up until sort of thinking about it recently, I've always kind of pictured him at the head with everybody trailing along behind. And I'm not sure he was there, particularly for people to be in front of him to lay their cloaks down and lay branches down and stuff like that. I think there's just this excitement building, which makes sense in a few minutes when it seems like after Jesus makes his entry, the Pharisees come and say, tell those people to be quiet. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Well, they had to already be doing that. But it's just, I don't know did anybody see the Super Bowl parade? Did anybody go see that? Okay, it was right outside my window at work. I got to see, Gruden and, all the players and just the yelling and the cheering and the clamor that went on as the crowd came in. And every time somebody really familiar came by, the noise. And when finally came through holding that trophy, it was just bedlam. And I picture that happening around Jesus as he comes in. The King is here. The Passover is coming. It's happening. So why did Jesus choose to come in this way beyond fulfilling prophecy?
He didn't come in as a worldly king.
Okay.
He came in as a spiritual king.
Okay.
And so that's the difference. He did not need the pomp and circumstance, and he came.
I'm going to take a little bit of issue with you there, because coming in riding on a donkey, which in our culture and our way of thinking is, who in the world would ever ride a donkey except some rube, who didn't know nothing. But in fact, a king who comes in peace would come to town riding on a donkey. Okay? A king coming in going to war would come in on a horse. Okay? So there is that, distinction, and I think the message is there as Luke is writing to the Gentiles, that as we talked all the way through this, that Jesus wasn't setting him up as this military revolutionary. Right. He came in as a king, but he came in as a king of peace, not a king of, okay, I'm here to run the Romans out of town. Okay, all right, good point. Other thoughts about why Jesus came in this way? Well, Matt.
I have a question. Are we supposed to at all think about Balaam's donkey and Jesus riding an obedient donkey all the way in?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so, but.
Not unless the donkey was the one
Yeah, there we go. There you go. Okay. Well, let's think about it this way. What other ways could Jesus have come into town? Walking, okay. He could have come in a chariot with a, okay, he didn't do that stuff. But how else? Okay, oh yeah, lifting him up and carrying him in, okay. Tyler, what you got? How else could he have come into town?
In terms of animals that he could have ridden,
Well,
he could have ridden any other donkey other than the one that had never been ridden before.
Okay, think about what's going on. At this time, Jesus has a lot of opposition. We don't read about it here in Luke, but if you start looking at the other gospel accounts of what is happening here around the time of Jesus coming into town, you got the resurrection or the raising of Lazarus from the dead, okay, and the enemies of Jesus going away from that, saying, the high priest saying, we got to kill him. Okay. Since John chapter 9, it's already been anybody who stands out and stands in support of Jesus, we're going to throw him out of the synagogue. So there is a measure of danger associated with Jesus coming into Jerusalem. Because now it's not just, those envoys that they've sent from Jerusalem to go check him out, and maybe set him straight. He's coming right into the heart of things. So there's a measure of danger. Chris?
Well, there's also the thing there where he could come in with all of his supporters, rally his troops. He could have come in on a chariot with, coat of mail on and a sword at his side, and he could have, if he was going to try to do the thing they were expecting and raise an army and fight Rome and renew the Jewish nation as a power on earth, that would have been a completely different entry. And he very well could have done that.
Okay.
He could have rallied the troops and come in as a revolutionary and storm the gates and done all that stuff. But he did none of that, which is, I think, the point.
Okay. Here's what else he didn't do. We'll do Karen. I think something else of significance is there. But Karen?
I think you're almost there as to what I'm thinking, which is it could be a measure of protection at this point.
All right, it's a measure of protection. We're going to read in just a few verses that the religious establishment, when Jesus gets there and is teaching in the temple, is just fit to be tied, but they can't do anything because they're afraid of people. Okay. But the other thing that he didn't do is he didn't sneak into town. Okay, there's a price on his head. There's stuff that's happening, so I'm just going to kind of slip into town, okay? And, I'll wait till maybe nobody's looking, and I'll sneak into the temple grounds, and I'll pull people aside, and I'll teach them stuff over in the corner. He comes in openly, and he comes openly in a way that makes it clear that he thinks he's the Messiah. I mean, coming in fulfilling prophecy and people cheering Hosanna and laying down, stuff in the road to pave the way, like if a physical king was coming to town. It's time for that. It wasn't time for people to go talk, for me to tell people, go tell everybody about this miracle that I just did. But now it's time. One writer has suggested perhaps he did it this way because he was provoking his enemies to go ahead and do this. He's going to be crucified on the Passover. He's going to be the Passover lamb. His enemies are in a mode that, the Passover's coming. We got all these rituals to do. We don't want to get unclean. Right after the Passover, we're going to get him. And Jesus comes in a way that doesn't let them move to that position. It's we got to act, and we got to act now. Okay? Otherwise, the crowds are going to, they're just going to go nuts, and who knows what the Romans are going to do. It's, the world's, we got to act now. So perhaps part of it was provoking them. It's time. God has a timetable that's not yours, and this thing is going to happen like it's supposed to. But he's coming in clearly as a king. People are calling him king. He's not denying it. And as he has already been teaching, and it's been clear that he's pointing to himself as the Messiah, in the next few days as he teaches in the temple grounds, he's going to double down on all of that stuff, which we'll get into in next week's lesson. He's also coming in as his choice. This is not, okay, the crowd we're almost to Jerusalem. He can't stop us. We're going to pick him up and we're going to drag him into town, and he's the king and it's time and we're going to do this. It's not that way. He chooses the time. He chooses the manner. And he comes in as his choice, his timetable. So there's really a lot going on here. Any other comments about this? It's interesting that Luke is the one that talks about the crowd crying out that he's a king. You look at the other accounts, they talk about him yelling Hosanna, which meant nothing to a Gentile reader. You know, they didn't understand that phrase. But this idea of him coming as a king, but coming as a king of peace, and not coming as a war revolutionary, that's the message that Luke is getting over to the person that he's writing. And in the first century, understand, as people are getting impatient and maybe a little worried about Jesus hadn't come back, things are not quite working out the same way, Luke is painting this story that it's a different kind of kingdom than that. Okay? And so there's meaning for them as well. So he comes in, they're hollering, they're screaming, it's a big deal. There's lots of people. And as he approached Jerusalem, well, before he did that, verse 39, the people are hollering, and some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." What were they wanting? What was the rebuke supposed to be in their minds? Chris?
Well, the fact that they were calling him king, that they were saying he was the prophet, the one the prophets spoke of, all of that.
Okay.
No other rabbi in the world would have let this go on, because they all taught as teachers of the law, of students of the law. They were not the king.
Okay.
And they would never have allowed their disciples to go on like this. And so they just said to Jesus, do the same thing we would.
Who do you think you are?
Yeah.
What do you think you're doing?
It's like he actually
Tell
was
them to
the
be quiet.
fulfillment. Yeah.
And what's Jesus' response?
Yeah.
What a claim. You know, I tell you the truth, if they didn't cry, can you just imagine the reaction that the Pharisees had to that? You know, it's like smoke coming out of their ears. Interesting thing is this is the last mention of the Pharisees in the Gospel of Luke. Okay? When we get into chapter 20 and we start looking at the other groups, we're going to talk about the Sanhedrin, we're going to talk about the Sadducees, we're going to talk about the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. Jesus is done with the Pharisees. They have no, as a group, they have no play at this point. Instead, we're going to see him dealing with some other groups and, frankly, putting them in their place. Yeah.
Just a question. I didn't know that. I did not know this was the last mention of the Pharisees.
In the Gospel of Luke. In the Gospel of Luke.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, are there other mentions of the other Gospels of the Pharisees?
You have to go look. I think when we look at the chapter 20 and the groups that come to Jesus and what they do and what they say, Luke is picking and choosing the stories and the confrontations that he's using for a point.
Yeah.
and to cover some stuff. But in the Gospel of Luke, this is the last mention of a Pharisee. Okay? Certainly they're around, they're mixed in with some of, there were Pharisees on the Sanhedrin and whatever. But as a group and as a term, you don't see it again in the Gospel of Luke, which is kind of interesting. So, and at this point, we have what we mentioned before, verse 41. As he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it and said, if even you had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it's hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They'll dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They won't leave one stone on another because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you. So again, this is in your video of Jesus coming in. He's not coming in like this. Okay? At least part of the time he's emotional. He's weeping because he knows what's going to happen. Well, verse 45, then he entered the temple area and began driving out those who were selling. It's written, he said to them, my house will be a house of prayer, but you've made it a den of robbers. We probably all have similar pictures of this event in our videos. If you went to Sunday school as a kid, there was always, him with the whip or the cords that he tied together to throw them out. It's interesting what was going on here. When you came to the Passover, everyone was required to pay an annual temple tax. Okay? And it amounted to half a shekel, which was about 2 days' wages. Okay? But when you came to pay your temple tax, you had to pay it in shekels, and you had to have exact change. Guess where, if you showed up from, the outer reaches, you've come to Jerusalem for the Passover of your life. Everybody wanted to do that at least once during their lifetime. You've come from far away. You don't have shekels. And you don't have exact change. Where do you suppose you solved that problem? The money changers in the temple. Any of you traveled internationally and, tried to get exchange for coins? Is it fair? No. You get that Visa statement and you got, 35 cents here, 40 cents there. Before you know it, you got six charges for one purchase, on your credit card account. Put that on steroids here. Okay? Money changers there, well, we can get you exact, oh, you need shekels? We can get you shekels. And they would soak these folks. Okay? In many cases, the poor showing up, who didn't have it, well, I've got this, well, we can take care of you, but it's gonna cost you. On top of that, you had to come, it's the Passover. There are like sacrifices that are to be made. You got to have your animals inspected. Okay? You can't even come, you can maybe get into the court of the Gentiles, because we let even Gentiles come into that area. You can bring your animals, but they got to be inspected before you can go any further and get accepted for sacrifices. Guess who does the animal inspections? The priests. Okay? The booths where the money changing happened and where the animals were inspected were called the booths of Annas. Okay, who was Annas? High priest. He was the high priest. So guess who was getting the profits from all of this? Okay. When's the last time you went to a football game or a concert and went to the concession stand and tried to buy a Coke? How many 2-liter bottles of Coke can you buy at Publix for the Coke that you get at a football game? Guess what doves and lambs and animals for sacrifice, guaranteed to be acceptable to the priest, cost you in the court of the Gentiles as you were going in to give your Passover sacrifice. This is what Jesus came in and saw. What upset him so was just the gross bilking and soaking of the poor for profit, and profit that was going to the high priest and his family. And so when he comes in and, flips out, it's not because, they moved the communion table to the back of the auditorium, okay? Okay? Or we're using overheads for songs, we're not using songbooks anymore. Nothing like that. It's just, this was a mess. These were the folks who were supposed to be the intermediaries between man and God, and the kind of behavior that they were in. And so Jesus comes in. He says, we're not going to have it. This is my Father's house. It's not going to be a den of robbers. Okay? And so when he uses that term robbers, that's exactly what he's talking about, because that's exactly what's going on. Well, every day, verse 47, he was teaching at the temple, but the chief priest, the teachers of the law, and leaders among the people were trying to kill him. Yet they could not find any way to do it because all the people hung on his words. Okay. And that sort of sets the table. Chris, you got...
Well, I just had a moment where I was thinking about how powerful the people are when they gather together and support their cause or their person. And we've seen it in our country, and we've seen it around the world.
Okay.
Revolutions happen because people kind of get fed up enough to stand up and to support the people that they believe in. This was no different, but in this case, they kept Jesus alive for, the whole week. Of course, it was God that did it, but the enemies of Jesus had already decided to kill him. We're looking for every opportunity, but they just couldn't find it because of all of the people that were around supporting him.
Okay. And in their mind, it's getting worse because the Passover is approaching. Okay. Any other thoughts on this? Notice that the group that was united to try to kill him was the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the leaders among the people. And next week we're going to talk about those groups in more specific. In fact, we probably ought to get on into it because we've got a few minutes left. Any other thoughts about this? This is not sort of these are not little events that are happening. This is monumental stuff with lots of people and out in the open. Jesus is not skulking around. Okay, there are times we read over in John where, they reach out to grab him and he just gets away, and we don't exactly know how that happened. But as we get into chapter 20, he's not hiding over in the corner of the courtyards of the temple. He's right there, and the people are crowding around him. So as you think about chapter 20 and him doing this teaching, it's similar to, I think, to some of what we saw on the road, where there are the disciples there with him, okay? There are those followers and would-be disciples, and in some case other disciples. They're all there hanging on his word, really in support. And then there are his enemies, and they're all there. And as we go through the conversations in chapter 20, it's going to bounce around between times when Jesus is talking directly to his enemies, times when he's talking to his disciples, and times when he's addressing the crowd so that everyone could hear. Well, let's delve into the beginning of this. Let's read the first verses of chapter 20. One day, he was teaching the people in the temple courts and preaching the gospel. The chief priest and the teachers of the law, together with their elders, came up to him. Tell us by what authority you are doing these things. Who gave you this authority? Now think about the groups that are here. One is the chief priests. Who were the chief priests?
They were sort of the managers of.
Okay.
So they kind of. The chief priests, I assume, were
Okay.
sort of the. What do you want to say? The decision makers.
Okay,
kinda.
decision makers.
Things went to them, and they said, "Do this, do that." You know, kind of.
All right. How'd you get to be a chief priest?
You were a priest for a long time.
Okay. Did they have political, they have elections? They put, you put up sign in your yard, vote for, Okay. It actually was genealogical. The chief priests were a group that could trace their genealogy through to a guy named Zadok, who was the chief priest. He was the head priest under Solomon. And so it very much, this whole group is really old money, okay? Power, money, influence, and the chief priests in particular they had to prove and trace they had to be a tribe of Levi, of course, but beyond just being in the tribe of Levi, they had to be able to trace themselves back to the high priest under Solomon. Okay, very powerful, very rich. The next group are the chief priests, the teachers of the law, together with the elders. Okay, elders were the old money of Jerusalem. They were the established society, families, owned businesses, controlled the economy to the extent that they could under the Romans, in bed with the Romans in many cases in order to retain their power. And then you got the teachers of the law. Teachers of the law were an interesting group because in one sense, anybody could be a teacher of the law if they put in the time and they put a stay. It was not restricted to just tribe of Levi. It wasn't restricted to people who, could afford the college tuition. It's like if you put in the time, and really it was a course of study that by and large took you, if you stuck with it, by the time you were 40 years old, you were allowed to be called a rabbi. And very respected, very studied in the law, and very egotistical about their education. They expected, teachers of the law expected when they walked by for the common folks to stand up. Okay? They were the ones that Jesus jumped on because they were robbing widows. They would go in and financially take advantage of women who had no power, who were widows. But an influential, these were the guys that were in charge. And they were in charge in the temple grounds. They were the head dogs. So doesn't it make sense that the question they came and asked Jesus is, who do you think you are? Who told you you could do this? Okay. So it kind of makes sense that this is the first group that comes and confronts Jesus in the temple. And the question is, hey, we're in charge here. Who told you, who told you you could do this? He replied, I'll ask you a question. Tell me, John's baptism, was it from heaven or from men? What do we learn from Jesus' response? actually a couple of good lessons for us in how Jesus responds here. Chris and then Renee.
How about Renee first?
Okay.
He just did not address their question.
Okay. So Jesus was apologetic? No.
No, he didn't acknowledge, he did not reinforce their authority
Okay.
by not answering the question that was
Okay.
burning for them.
Okay. All right.
He refused to give them the authority that
Okay.
they thought they had.
Okay.
Well, I think that when he did this, he asked them a question. And at the end, when they refused to answer, like Renee said, he said, okay, well, I'm not going to answer your question. And I like the way she put it, that he did not recognize their authority to question him.
Okay. What do we do when somebody comes and asks us a religious question? What do we normally do?
Go to the Bible.
Well, go to the Bible. Tyler, you had your hand up?
We try to answer the question.
We fall all over ourselves to come up, I'm going to come up with 6 scriptures here that's going to answer your question. And Jesus doesn't do that. He says, well, tell me this. I got a question for you. There's wisdom in that. In fact, a good study for you is to go through the gospel and look at how many times Jesus responded to things that people said with a question. There's some real wisdom in that. One is, for us, it means we listen and try to understand what's the real question that they're answering. Maybe we're going to come up with 6 scriptures that have nothing to do with whatever it is that they're asking us. And a little bit of, not defiant. I don't get the sense here that Jesus is puffing out his chest and, well, you tell me that. I don't see him, my video doesn't have him doing that. If anything, he's, maybe there's a little wry smile that's there. But it's, tell me this. John's baptism. Where did it come from? Yes, back here.
It seems to me like it's psychological as well.
Okay.
For example, when a toddler is crying and puffing and things like that, you can approach the child and ask the child a question. Redirects the mind from all the anger, and they're able to focus.
Okay. These guys think they're in charge. Are they in charge? They're not in charge. They think they are. And many of the people hold them in charge. I can't imagine when these guys come up, Jesus is teaching. And in my mind, the video is these guys come up as a group and they're, and people are parting and, what's going to happen now? Here we go. And these guys, I don't know what kind of distance it is, but I don't see them standing at the back of the crowd and yelling this stuff out. I think they're coming right up and getting in Jesus' face. Who do you think you are? Who gave you the authority to do this? And Jesus, unperturbed, says, well, let me ask you a question. John's baptism, where did it come from? What's at the heart of Jesus' question to these guys? Where's the real authority? Where's John's baptism? And they get it, okay, because it says, and we'll finish up with this, they discussed it among themselves. Again, I don't know how that picture is. I don't know what they expected Jesus to do. Who you think? I'm sorry, guys. Can I go over here? Can I go over here in the corner and just have and just teach a little bit? It's like, no, tell me. And rabbis and teachers were used to having questions thrown around and talk about theological subjects. So Jesus says, well, tell me, John's baptism, where'd it come from? Not what they were saying. I almost see them, physically moving. We can't say this, we can't say that. And it says that they discussed it among themselves and said, if we say from heaven, he'll ask, well, why didn't you believe him? But if we say from men, all the people will stone us because they're persuaded John was a prophet. So they answer, oh, we don't know where it came from. What an answer. Where did they really think John's baptism came from?
Well, I think they thought it was from God. Because, I mean, they knew there was something going on with all of these prophecies. And, Isaiah 40 spoke loudly about what John did. And they knew all that. But none of their questioning was about righteousness and holiness and the Word of God. Okay. All of their questioning was about their power, their authority, and their position, and how it was being threatened by this Jesus guy that came into town. And so I think all of their motivation was selfishness.
Okay. And I will agree with you that I think some of them had some real questions about it. But what they wanted to answer was, well, this is from men. We're in charge here. That guy was out there in the countryside living like a wild man. We're where the righteousness is. We're in charge. That's what they wanted to say. But they couldn't say it. And yet, as Chris pointed out, there are all these signs and miracles and things happening. We can't say it's from God. That's the wrong answer, because then Jesus is going to march right in and dethrone us. So what are we going to tell him? Let's just tell him we don't know. Oh, we don't know. And I love Jesus' response. Well, then I'm not going to tell you by what authority I do things. There are lots of things from the scriptures that I would love to have seen. The parting of the Red Sea and the miracles and the walking on the water and all that kind of stuff. But as I go through chapter 20, I love to see the expression on people's faces as these events played out. Because here is Jesus in the middle of the temple with hundreds, maybe thousands of people gathered around, and the head honcho's coming up trying to bully him, and he just completely disarms them. He doesn't have to scream, he doesn't have to shout, he doesn't have to shake his finger and say, if you can't tell me, I'm not going to tell you. And we'll pick up next week with what he does next. Matt, we'll close with you.
I just want to make a quick comment. I think it's interesting what you're bringing out from the text here, that there's a difference in what the people were believing and thinking about the current state of events, John's baptism and John's, what he was doing, and the religious authority, the social authority here, trying to control a narrative and keep power, which makes me think about John's purpose, which was to prepare the way for Jesus. So in some way, the public mind was open to something new, open to something else coming through, perhaps specifically Jesus. But to me, in my mind, there's always been kind of a question: exactly what did John prepare for Jesus? And maybe that it was that mindset that already the people are thinking, well, maybe our religious authority is not treating us how they should, or something like that.
Thank you, Matt. There's your homework for next week. And it's a great point, and I think worthy of talking about here as we go through these encounters that are going to happen in chapter 20. And that's, what was the preparation of John? How did he prepare the way? There are a couple of, I think, significant answers to that fit right in with what's happening here in chapter 20. So that's your homework for next week. And we'll look at that, and we'll look at some other groups of people that come up and try to trip up Jesus. Let's close with a prayer. God, we thank you for our time together tonight to study your word. Thank you for our imaginations and our thoughts as we're able to try to picture in our minds how this happened. God, thank you for the word that shares with us and tells us, teaches us so much about the way that Jesus came. That he didn't come into Jerusalem by accident or because he was swept along, or he didn't sneak in, but he came in making it clear that he was there as a king of peace. And that as we see those who would try to disrupt and to thwart him, that he's calm and he's in control. Help us to have a trust and a faith in you that when things are tumultuous around us, that we keep our cool, that you give us wisdom and things to say that are helpful. Help us to learn to listen better and to try to be as helpful as we can as we tell people about your grace and what all you've done to provide salvation for us. Be with us as we part now. Give us safe trips home, a good rest tonight. Bless our encounters and our example and the things that we're involved with tomorrow. And we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.